في هذا الفيديو شاب مسيحي يغوص لأول مرة في النسخة الإسلامية من حياة المسيح. هو يؤمن أن عيسى هو الله، لكنه لم يتخيل يوما أننا كمسلمين نؤمن بمعجزاته ربما أكثر مما يعرفه هو. كيف ستكون ردة فعله حين يكتشف أن القرآن خلد تفاصيل للمسيح ومعجزات لم تذكر في إنجيله؟ شاهدوا الصدمة والدهشة في عينيه وهو يكتشف المسيح في الإسلام من منظور لم يقرأه في كتبه.
Now, we come to Jesus, aka Isa in Arabic. And his miracles in the Quran require careful attention because they reveal something crucial about how Islamic theology works and how they actually view Jesus Christ. Now, Jesus performs more dramatic miracles in the Quran than maybe any other prophet. And the list is just, extraordinary. So he speaks as an infant in the cradle. He defends his mother Mary against accusations of immortality. He molds a bird from clay and then breathes into it and then becomes a living bird. He heals the blind and a leper, and then he raises people from the dead. He tells people what they've eaten and what they've stored in their houses. And all of these miracles, even some miracles that don't exist in Christian literature. And all of this is described in Surah Al-Imran, verse 49, and Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 110. The verse in Al-Imran basically says, I have come to you with a sign from the Lord. I create for you out of clay the form of a bird, and then I breathe into it, and it becomes a bird by God's permission. I heal the blind and the leper, and I give life to the dead by God's permission. Now, notice the phrase that appears again and again, by God's permission. And this isn't incidental. This is fundamental to understanding Islamic theology. The Quran is emphatic that Jesus is a prophet. He's just a messenger. He's a servant of God, which is an extremely high rank, but it's not how Christians will see him. Christians see Jesus Christ literally as God himself, as perfectly divine, right? Jesus' miracles are often understood as expressions of his own divine nature, and the Quran frames them from, Jesus' miracles as just an act that God performed through Jesus. You can see the discrepancy, right? The power belongs to God. Jesus is the vessel, not the source. Now, this preserves what is known as tawhid. This is the oneness of God, and this is perhaps the most central doctrine of Islam. It's truly the worst sin that one can commit is to go against tawhid, to go against the oneness of God, to be polytheistic. When Jesus heals or creates or resurrects, it is God, it is the one singular non-contingent creator, Allah, that is doing all of this healing and creating and resurrecting. Jesus is honored and revered and maybe considered one of the greatest prophets, but he's not God. And his miracles prove God's power, not his own divinity. That is how it's understood in Muslim theology. Now, for viewers familiar with Christian theology, maybe you grew up Christian, maybe you went to Sunday school, this framing is pretty striking, right? The miracles are often the same or similar, but the theological interpretation is fundamentally different. So you have the same wonders. You have, creation and, healing and all these things that you might find in the Bible, but just a completely different perspective. Now let's move on to another central figure in Islam, and that is the Prophet Muhammad. Again, peace be upon him. I said it once before, but this just goes for the whole episode. Shout out to y'all. Muhammad's greatest and most enduring miracle is, according to Islamic theology, it is the Quran itself. Like we mentioned before, right? We talked about this at the beginning, but it's worth emphasizing. Unlike Moses' staff or Jesus' healing, the Quran miracle isn't a one-time thing. It's going on right now for Muslims. Every generation can experience it. Every Muslim will experience it for the first time, and they'll remember that feeling. Every person can hear it be recited and read the words and literally challenge themselves based on what it says. But the Quran does describe one spectacular supernatural event in Muhammad's life, and that is the Isra and the Mira, the night journey and ascension. Now, in Surah Al-Isra, verse 1, the Quran states, "Glory be to him who took his servant by night from Al-Masjid Al-Haram to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, whose surroundings we have blessed to show him of our signs." According to Islamic tradition, Muhammad was taken in a single night, basically, from Mecca to Jerusalem, a journey of over 750 miles, and from there, ascended through the heavens, meeting previous prophets and ultimately coming into the divine presence. The Hadith literature expands on this account dramatically and describes 7 heavens and encounters with Adam, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, and the establishment of the 5 daily prayers. You can imagine this event, right, happening in the Quran, where you have the Prophet Muhammad literally meeting with all these other prophets, Adam, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, all in one place in Jerusalem. It is such a miraculous moment. Like truly, it's like you can imagine for Muslims how central that one singular event is. Now, classical commentators treat this both as a literal miraculous journey and also a profound spiritual experience, kind of both things happening simultaneously. It affirmed Muhammad's status as a prophet amongst all these other prophets and really consoled him during a period of intense hardships. This came after the deaths of his wife Khadijah and his uncle Abu Talib. And it also demonstrated his unique position amongst all the prophets. Now, the Hadith collections, basically the records of Muhammad's sayings and actions compiled after his death, describe additional physical miracles: the splitting of the moon, water flowing from his fingers, multiplication of food, trees moving to provide him shade. Muslim scholars like those at the Yaqeen Institute emphasize these reports are subjected to rigorous Hadith criticism. Again, a Hadith is maybe not the same level of perfection when, in reference to Islamic literature. You have the Quran as the, beautiful revealed words and thoughts of Allah. And the Hadiths is a human understanding, but a very old, ancient recollection of the life of the Prophet. Now, these Hadith have been criticized and sort of analyzed by Muslim scholars for, literally centuries. Analysis of the, chain of transmissions and the reliability of the narrators, and many are considered to be historically well attested. But the emphasis in Islamic theology remains very clear. Muhammad's primary miracle is the Quran. The physical wonders are secondary and ultimately are done only by the power of Allah, the Quran included. But the text is perhaps the most significant miracle in and of itself. Now, in the 20th and 21st centuries, a new category of Quranic miracles emerged, the so-called scientific and mathematical miracles. Now, it's really interesting the way that Muslims will view this in the Quran versus how Christians view this in the Bible. Contemporary Muslim writers point to verses that they believe anticipate modern scientific discoveries. So, for example, the stages of embryonic development described in Surah Al-Mu'minun, verses 12 through 14, the expansion of the universe mentioned in Surah At-Dariyat, verse 47, the barrier between two seas in Surah Al-Rahman, verses 19 through 20, and the descriptions of mountains having roots or pegs to stabilize the earth. Now, the argument is that the prophet, an illiterate man living in 7th century Arabia, could not have known these things through natural means. Therefore, the Quran must have been divinely revealed. Some scholars will also highlight that these mathematical miracles are basically patterns involving the number 19 or symmetrical word counts or numerical relationships between chapters and verses that seem too precise and too frequent to just be, an accident. And now what makes it interesting from, the Muslim view versus Christianity is that a lot of my Muslim friends will accept this type of scientific challenging, that they want the Quran to be challenged through a scientific lens because they believe that it is the singular revealed words of God himself. But a lot of Christians will look at the Bible and they don't necessarily have the same level of scrutiny. A lot of my Christian friends will view the Bible and say, yeah, there's things that maybe are scientifically accurate, and that's awesome. But if they're not scientifically accurate, that's also okay. It's sort of metaphorical, and there's some other type of explanation. And that's not to say that Christians think that the Bible is, fallible or isn't true, but just to say that the level of scientific scrutiny that they hold over that text is, I think, different than how Muslims view it. But what's interesting is that even within Muslim and Islamic scholarship, there's debate. Some mainstream scholars accept that the Quran's numerical structure and its alignment with certain scientific observations reflect divine wisdom. Yet others would warn against this for fear of overclaiming, arguing that scientific interpretations are inherently, provisional, basically science changes over time, and that forcing modern science onto ancient texts can lead to some retractions, and that the Quran's primary miracle is the language and the guidance and literally the text itself, not necessarily its compatibility with biology textbooks. And the caution there, I get, right? It's shared across multiple schools of Islamic thought, from Sunni to Shia to rationalist traditions alike. And then when early proponents of these scientific miracles claimed that the Quran described embryology in terms identical to modern science, critics pointed out that similar descriptions could have existed in different medical texts available in the ancient world, but maybe they didn't connect each other, maybe they didn't hear each other. But, of course, this debate continues. But what most Muslim scholars agree on is this: the Quran's credibility doesn't depend on whether it predicted the Big Bang or not. It's not whether embryology or understanding, insects or bees or anything like that. Its miracle is the text, it's the eloquence and the guidance and what a lot of Muslims perceive as this spiritual truth, like the challenge that remains unanswered after 14 centuries. And that the scientific miracles might be interesting and really support, evidence for some believers, but they're not necessarily the foundation. I find them really interesting. As a matter of fact, we actually did an episode, was it Religion Camp or was it the main Camp Gagnon channel?
Religion Camp.
It was Religion Camp, right? We did an episode going through a lot of these miracles in the Quran, specifically the scientific mathematical miracles, which is really interesting. You guys can check that out. We can put it in the description or something like that. Now, there is another. This is the theology of miracles and sort of how Muslims will perceive miracles generally. Like, how do scholars categorize and understand these extraordinary events? Now, classical Islamic theology makes a crucial distinction between two types of wonders. The first is mu'jiza. This is a prophetic miracle. This is an extraordinary event that God creates through a prophet paired with a challenge to opponents or people that are denying the oneness of God, specifically to prove the truth of the prophetic claim. Like the staff becoming the serpent, the sea parting, the Quran itself. These are mu'jizat, signs that validate a prophet's mission. And the second is karama, a saintly wonder. This is an extraordinary event granted to a non-prophet, or not literally a non-prophet, like someone that isn't a prophet, specifically to a wali, a friend of God or a saint. Now, the difference between these kinds of miracles is really important because a karama doesn't come with a prophetic claim. The person experiencing it isn't challenging anyone to accept a new revelation. It's simply just a sign of God's favor, sort of in favor of just like a righteous person. And this distinction is important because Islam, like other traditions, has to account for why people that aren't prophets sometimes seem to experience miraculous things. Sufi literature is full of stories about saints performing wonders. Now, if you don't know, Sufism is the mystical tradition within Islam. It's kind of not really a different sect. It's sort of just a different philosophy towards Islam. It has a real strong desire to experience Allah now and in the present. So as a result, Sufi literature and many, Sufi scholars will talk about, miraculous provision and bilocation, basically being in multiple locations at once, and clairvoyance, and all these miraculous things. The theology surrounding the karama category allows these experiences to be affirmed without threatening the unique status of a Moses or a Jesus or a Prophet Muhammad. Scholars also warn about a third category. This is known as istidraj. These are the deceptive wonders. Now, these are extraordinary events that appear miraculous, but don't come from God's approval. Now, these might be things like magic, demonic assistance, psychological manipulation, like the Egyptian magicians' tricks before Moses' serpent devoured them fall into this category, right? Like they look supernatural, but they aren't. They are not from the one God, according to Muslims. And this is why in Islamic literature, miracles alone aren't proof of anything, really. Like the content of the message matters a lot in the context and who it's happening to and for what reason. A miracle performed by someone preaching falsehood isn't from God. The miracles authenticate the truth, ultimately. They authenticate the message, and the message must be examined for its veracity. Now, what's the purpose of all these wonders anyway? Muslim theologians are consistent about this one single thing. Miracles exist for 4 reasons: confirm prophets, strengthen believers, expose falsehood, and point back to Allah. They're not for entertainment. They're not, magic tricks or to aggrandize human beings. They are signs.
عيسى عليه السلام هو الجسر الذي لا يعرف الكثيرون أنه يربط بيننا وبين الغرب. لقد رأيتم اليوم كيف يمكن للحقيقة أن تغير ملامح الدهشة إلى احترام. لا تنسوا الاشتراك في قناة فيرا، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.